The brown suitcase sat neatly by the front door, beside a taped-up box labeled "Private, Do Not Open, Inside." A younger woman crossed her legs on the same sofa Carolyn once chose with love. Her throat tightened, every breath sharp, like pulling air through broken glass. She stood there, weightless, misplaced, like a memory dropped into someone else's life. What if you signed a paper believing it was for your future together, only to realize your cheating husband just signed you out of your own home? Carolyn Barrett had spent most of her life inside quiet rooms, classrooms, kitchens, libraries, places where order could be kept and things had a place. At 65, retired from her decades as an elementary school teacher, she finally believed she had found a place of her own. 10 years earlier, after the slow unraveling of her first marriage, she met Stephen Barrett. He was measured, reliable, and spoke with the kind of calm certainty that made decisions sound like care. He was a civil engineer, still taking on light consulting work, and together they bought a modest 2-story brick house in Waynesboro, Virginia. It wasn't luxury, but it had an oak tree in the front yard and morning light that spilled across the kitchen counter. It was the kind of place a woman like Carolyn could imagine growing old without apology. They had no children together, but each brought one from previous marriages grown distant, polite in holiday cards. There were no bedtime stories anymore, only groceries and errands and shared television. Carolyn thought that was peace. She thought she had escaped the chaos others spoke of. She never imagined she would become part of a grey divorce. Stephen had begun speaking of finances a few months before it happened. He mentioned business debts and the need to restructure. He explained how selling the house would help them both: smaller space, lower taxes, more flexibility. They could clear the debts, invest the rest, maybe even travel. Carolyn listened. He sounded like he had a plan, and Carolyn had always respected plans. One evening, over leftover meatloaf, Stephen handed her a folder labeled Joint Asset Restructuring. She remembered how his tone had been soft, not pushy. He said it was just for the bank. She flipped through the papers briefly. Charts, legal phrases, something about value assessments. She didn't understand most of it, but she signed. A few days later, Stephen encouraged her to visit her daughter in Ohio. "Before we move," he had said, "take some time. Relax. You'll come back refreshed." It seemed kind. She packed a bag and left the next morning. For 3 weeks, she stayed in a quiet guest room in her daughter's home, baking with her granddaughter, watching the leaves change color. She texted Stephen now and then. At first, he responded quickly. Then the gaps grew longer. "Busy with work," he wrote. "All under control." She felt a knot begin to grow, but told herself not to worry. She had always hated being suspicious. That was for other marriages, for other women. Not her. Not them. But things were not under control. Carolyn returned home half a day earlier than planned. The front door was unlocked. The house smelled like nothing. No music, no coffee, no sign of her slippers or her reading glasses left on the table. She stepped into the living room and paused. The bookshelf was gone. So was the rug she had picked out from a flea market in Roanoke. On the coffee table stood a photo frame that hadn't been there before. Inside, it was a picture of Stephen with a woman Carolyn did not know. Younger, blonde, smiling too close. Carolyn's suitcase sat by the door, next to labeled boxes, her name written in marker, her belongings neatly packed. Stephen was on the sofa. His arm rested along the back, grazing the shoulder of the woman from the photograph. The woman looked at Carolyn and smiled. And with that smile, the family betrayal story she thought belonged to someone else became her own. Carolyn froze, her body rooted to the floor like the oak tree outside. Stephen handed her a folder. Inside were the divorce papers, already filled in. A separate packet confirmed the transfer of the house's ownership to Amanda, the woman now sitting where Carolyn used to read her books. Her own signature stared back at her. Pages she had signed, trusting, believing, legalized theft wrapped in professional formatting. The story Stephen had told about debt, about smart planning, was a lie. There was no failing business, no restructuring. There was only a strategy, and Carolyn had signed herself out of her own life. She didn't cry, she didn't collapse, but something inside her quieted in a way it had never quieted before. Her body reacted first. Her throat stiffened, breath heavy and sharp. Each swallow felt like pushing a cold stone through a narrow pipe. Her fingers turned cold, her legs uncertain. She reached for the edge of the door frame and held it, not knowing whether she meant to leave or brace herself. She walked slowly to one of the boxes, laid her hand on the taped top. It didn't feel like her life. It felt like someone else's donation. In the silence that followed, she finally spoke. "I was only gone 3 weeks," she said, and he managed to erase an entire life. It was not anger, it was not shock, it was resignation, heavy and slow. Her cheating husband had not simply betrayed her. He had prepared the house for someone else, as if she had never been part of it at all. The neighbors would later say they never suspected that Stephen had seemed thoughtful, always mowing the lawn, waving on Sundays. But Carolyn now understood betrayal didn't always look like shouting or slammed doors. Sometimes it came with calm voices, polite folders, and a plan. And sometimes, the worst part wasn't what was taken, it was how quietly it all happened. There is a cruel misunderstanding many women carry into their later years that love, if strong enough, will protect them from betrayal. But Carolyn Barrett learned otherwise. Love is not a contract, and in the eyes of the law, trust is not a defense. What ended her shared life was not a grand affair or violent argument. It was a pen stroke, a single, unexamined signature that gave everything away. This is the quiet horror behind so many stories of elder financial abuse. It does not always come in the form of outright theft. Sometimes, it arrives disguised as shared decisions, as soft reassurances, as what's best for both of us, until it isn't. Carolyn's husband, Stephen, was the architect of the deception. He created the false narrative of business debts, planted the suggestion of downsizing, and led her gently but intentionally into signing documents that would transfer their home to his mistress. He planned every step, but Carolyn had a part in this downfall, too. She did not ask questions. She did not retain copies. She never consulted a lawyer. She signed because she loved, and that, tragically, was the opening Stephen needed. But this is not just a family betrayal story. It is a revenge story, written in ink and court filings, not fury. Carolyn did not run away. She did not crumble. Instead, she moved into a friend's home nearby, her face stained with tears, but her hands gripping a legal notepad. And she began, page by page, to take her life back. The first step was collecting every piece of documentation: mortgage records, past emails, the so-called restructuring contract. Her aim was clear: to prove that the purpose Stephen claimed, a business debt, was a fabrication. The second step was filing a civil lawsuit for fraudulent property transfer. It was a meticulous process, but Carolyn had help. Her daughter's husband, a software engineer, managed to retrieve footage from the living room security camera. In the video, Stephen was seen handing Carolyn the documents while saying, "This isn't the house sale, just some banking stuff." That video became her strongest evidence. It showed intent to deceive. It proved Stephen had misrepresented the nature of what she was signing. The court ruled in her favor. The property transfer was declared void due to fraud. Carolyn regained her legal rights to the home. Divorce proceedings followed. This time, with proper legal counsel, She secured a fair division of their remaining assets. The judge ordered Stephen to compensate her financially for the emotional and legal harm caused. This wasn't just about a cheating husband. It was about reclaiming identity, agency, and voice. Carolyn's fight was not loud, but it was precise. She didn't just want to escape, she wanted justice. And justice, at last, answered her call. Carolyn Barrett did not return to the house she fought so hard to reclaim. Once the court ruling was finalized, she packed what was hers and walked away. Some places hold more than memories. They hold betrayal in the walls, in the floorboards, in the silence of every room. She knew peace would never bloom in that house again. So she found a small apartment on the quieter edge of Waynesboro, Virginia. Sunlight streamed through the kitchen window. The floors creaked gently, like an old friend whispering, "You're safe here." Every detail in that space, from the soft blue curtains to the simple dining table, was chosen by her, and only her. But she didn't just rebuild her life. She offered others the bricks she once stumbled over. Carolyn began writing, not about heartbreak, but about law. She posted detailed notes in online forums for older women guides to understanding marital property, signs of financial coercion, what questions to ask before signing anything. She spoke at her local church on Sunday afternoons, standing in the small meeting room where the choir used to rehearse. Her voice was steady. Her stories were precise. She didn't cry. She didn't ask for pity. She came back for the others, for the women still walking blindly through their own quiet wars. What Carolyn learned became her purpose. She reminded them, you don't need to be angry to take control. You don't need to fight loudly to fight well. Even after being betrayed by a cheating husband, you can walk into court with your name held high and reclaim what was stolen from you, not just your house, but your dignity. In her words, carved like a lesson into the soul. Not everyone who gets fooled is weak. Some women, after the fall, learn to sign again, this time, with their own name. She ended every talk with the same quiet call to action. Go home tonight and check every document in your name. Look at the house deed, the retirement accounts, the trusts and the investment funds. Make a list of everything you've signed, and write down the reason you were told to sign it. If you don't have a copy, ask for one. If something doesn't look right, speak. And if, one day, you find yourself where Carolyn once stood, staring at your life packed into boxes, betrayed and bewildered, leave a message for the next woman. Maybe at 2 a.m, when she's scrolling with tears in her eyes. Your story will reach her. Maybe your truth will be the thing that saves her home. Because justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes, it's about one woman standing back up and showing the others where the cracks are in the floor.